Welcome into the Take the North podcast, along with Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune. I am Mark Grote of Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score, and right now we are talking about the Bears' offensive line because the Bears are trading for the Chiefs' all-pro guard Joe Thuney for a 2026 fourth-round pick, and that certainly solves a problem, presumably, at your left guard spot. Wiederer, your initial reaction to this move by the Bears?
Yeah, to quote my wife, "'Tis the season" when you scramble in from the middle school carpool line to react to a trade development this big, and a trade development that comes on the heels of another trade a day earlier for Jonah Jackson. You understand that the Bears' vow to be aggressive during this offseason has been backed by action, and there is no question that this is an absolutely huge ad. And the question I was going to start you out with, Grote, is did we just go from planning a free agency preview edition to planning a Super Bowl preview edition?
Ooh, I think that this makes it pretty obvious. It's a pretty clear path to the Super Bowl. All of a sudden, even if it's not that, at least we are beginning to see action that makes sense and different players along that offensive line. We know Joe Thuney will be slotted in. I'm guessing that Jonah Jackson will be slotted in, but we don't know the rest of the way. But this is a really good start, and it takes some of the stresses off of the free agency pile and even in the draft.
Yeah, well, look, like there's a lot of details to both of these trades over the last couple of days that we can kind of sort through kind of in real time here as we figure out what it does to change the Bears' approach, going forward, and what it does to impact their depth chart, which we obviously have seen additions of 2 starters up front already before free agency arrives. It's a big deal that the Bears are going to these lengths to make life on Caleb Williams easier. And you and I talked from Indy last week that with all of the chatter about everything the Bears were going to do in this offseason, the center of that spoke, or the center of that wheel, is Caleb Williams, and how do you do things to make his life easier in 2025. These are 2 definitely big moves in that direction. With Thuney, you've got a guy that has played and won 4 Super Bowls. He has 4 Super Bowl rings, right? And he's a 4-time All-Pro, and he's a first-team All-Pro the last couple of years in Kansas City at the guard position primarily. And so you have a proven difference maker up front. Now, look, he's 32 years old, who will turn 33 inside of the season, and you have to understand that this is probably a short-term move. He also only has 1 year left on his deal. So now it's up to Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson and their staffs to figure out what do extension talks look like, if there are going to be some, and what does that look like? But in the center of the story is that the Bears have now added 2 proven players to their offensive line, and now we've got to figure out how the rest of those pieces come together up there. But man, like this is assertiveness in the early stages of the offseason.
And I have no problem whatsoever with short-term deals. If that's what, right? I mean, if that's what Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson have to do for the entirety of Caleb Williams' career, that's fine. I mean, you're not going to always have 5 well-paid long-term contracts along the offensive line. So this is look, the NFL is short-term. So, I mean, I think it just sort of goes hand in hand. One of the things that I absolutely love about this 32-year-old player, Joe Thuney, he really doesn't miss games. I mean, I'm just looking at it now. I'll just fire through this here, Dan. 2016, 16 out of 16 games. In 2017, 16 out of 16 games. 2018 and 2019 and 2020, 16 out of 16 games. 2021, 17 out of 17 games. In 2022, he did.
That's the one. That's the one blip on the radar. A little ankle issue. 2 games missed in 2022 in the regular season due to an ankle issue.
And his entire career, that's what he has missed, because in 2023, 17 out of 17, 2024, 17 out of 17. Durability would be a big deal, Dan.
A huge deal, an absolutely huge deal. And you hope that sort of follows the trend when he comes to Haugh. Look, he did miss a couple of postseason games a year ago with a pec injury suffered during the playoffs. But this is a guy who has been largely reliable, that you could put your Sharpie out instead of a pencil when you're making out your depth chart each week and just say, Joe Thuney is going to play for us this week. And so that's a huge sense of relief and comfort for this Bears team, this front office, this coaching staff, to know that you've got a guy that you can depend on. That was a problem. You and I have talked about it extensively, about last season being built around offensive linemen who we knew going into the season weren't going to be reliable or had the potential to have durability issues, and it played itself out that way. So that's a huge deal. The other part of it, again, a 4-time All-Pro. I think our friend Kevin Fishbane at The Athletic noted that the Bears have only had 3 All-Pro linemen in the entirety of their history: Olin Kreutz, Jay Hilgenberg, and Jimbo Covert. And so just wrap your brain around that for a minute, that now you've got a guy that has played the position at the highest level. Again, we've talked about questions that we'll kind of have to sift through here in the coming weeks. One of them is where is Joe Thuney slot into play? You would assume he's played most of his career at left guard. Well, so is Jonah Jackson. So how do they kind of move these pieces around? He's obviously had some work at left tackle, but is better as a guard. You would imagine you'd make an investment like this to bring him in at his preferred position. But now you've got to start to explain to people what your vision is up front and how you're going to do things. The other question I have for you is just like, what does this do now for their shopping spree down the center aisle of free agency next week? Because now you've allotted a good chunk of 2025 salary cap space to Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney. I think it's going to be in excess of $30 million to those two guys. So now maybe that changes the aggressiveness with which you pursue Drew Dahlman. And now you've got to figure out what is plan B at the center position. Jonah Jackson has some ability to play center, hasn't been great at it. Anyway, I'll leave it there for you and see what you've got to add.
You and I have seen up close the problems the Bears have at center in the past, but very quietly. I'm not saying Coleman Shelton is going to be the center of this team.
I'm with you though, as keep him on speed dial, right?
You keep him on speed dial, keep him on the roster. I think we learned last season that if you have somebody in, like, the Bears just haven't had competency at that position relative to last year. I mean, last year Coleman Shelton wasn't perfect, but he was pretty smooth, didn't stand out a lot, either great or bad. But in previous years, Lucas Patrick and Sam Mustipher and Cody Whitehair, that position has been a huge problem for the Bears. So, I think at this point, I mean, being that center is not considered like the premium position. I can't imagine them, Dan, at this point going after. Now that would be, maybe the Bears are doing things so differently this year that Drew Dahlman is still in play for the Bears. But my gut is that position will probably go to a guy. I'm not saying Coleman Shelton, but somebody like him.
Right, you've got guys like Ryan Kelly in Indy, Austin Corbett. They'll be on the market next week, most likely, and so now you've got to figure out what that looks like. I'm with you that when you've allotted this much money to your offensive line right out of the gates, and you have other positions that you need to address, that you probably want to allocate some resources elsewhere. Look, like starting this week, the Bears had 44 roster spots to fill, assuming that the expiring contracts they have in their current roster all expire before next week's free agency window opens. So you've got a lot of holes to fill. And look, like that's going to require you to make a bunch of lower tier free agent signings just to fill out the depth of this roster, to fill out your special teams, to get you reliable backups. And so now that puzzle has to come into clearer focus now that you've made these two major investments. I will say this on the Thuney trade, like when I heard the compensation, in terms of what they were giving up, a great 2026 Ford doesn't
take that
even make me blink at all, right?
No.
Like, you're not giving up anything this year, and you're getting a guy who slots in immediately as a high level starter for you. Like, yes, sign me up for that. And you and I talked last week in the context of Trey Smith that the Chiefs were going to have to make decisions. And so whenever you get a guy at this time of year, you have to ask yourself, why were they available? Well, part of the reason Joe Thuney is made available is because the Chiefs have to go pay Trey Smith now, right? Like they put the franchise tag on him. They're going to try to negotiate an extension. And in order to do that with all the other balls you have up in the air in free agency, you've got to find money. And so, like, one way to find money is to say, hey, 32-year-old guy who gave us several great years of his career, we just can't fit you here anymore. And we've got to pivot in a new direction. And the Bears are the beneficiaries of that. And again, Ryan Poles, Ben Johnson, their staffs getting aggressive to make it happen.
Yeah, and I agree with you too on the compensation. I couldn't believe that. I mean,
I was waiting for like a player to be thrown in, right? Like who did the Bears send? A backup linebacker or a safety or something along with the pick, but that's pretty low cost for that.
Yeah, right. Or somebody from this year's draft.
Sure.
I was really kind of surprised about the whole thing. Now, the Bears do lose a 6th rounder for Jonah Jackson. So now at the tail end of just keeping people up to date on the draft, they've got the 10th overall pick. The 2 second-rounders still exist. A 3rd, a 5th. The 6th is gone. You still have 2 7th-round picks, right? You haven't messed with the two 7th-round picks, so you're still very plentiful. I do want to look at let's construct the offensive lineup the way we would see it if the Bears were doing an OTA today. It would be Braxton Jones as your left tackle. I do believe, Dan, that Joe Thuney will get the left guard honors. Do you agree with that? I mean, I understand
that would be the direction I would lean, but if they feel like he's a little bit more comfortable on the other side, then maybe you play around with that and you put Jonah Jackson where he's had his best years, 2021 being the best of them all at left guard. But I don't know when the next time we're going to talk to either Ryan or Ben is, but man, like today would be a nice day for an emergency Zoom call with one of them just to get a little bit of clarity. Now, look, like the Bears can't make any of this official until the new league year begins, which isn't until next Wednesday afternoon. Right. But hopefully we hear from one of those two guys next week, because I feel like there's a lot of questions like this to get some clarity on.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I mean, even though if I had to hit the yes or no button on Drew Dalman, I guess right now I would probably hit no per our conversation just a second ago, Dan. But the way the Bears are doing business right now, and it is since the Ben Johnson hiring, things do feel different and things suddenly feel urgent as well. I mean, I think some of our questions have been answered about what the Bears think about next season. What they think about next season is that they're expected to win, and that Ben Johnson is supposed to come in here and win, and there's not going to be a rebuilding or transitional season, or at least that they're not going to be allowed that luxury.
We're 8 days removed from Ben Johnson telling us, yeah, of course the interior of the offensive line can be overhauled in one offseason. It's been done before, right? And then they go and do these two things, right? And it harkens me back to a comment Ryan Poles made at the Combine, where when you have clear vision, you can be more aggressive. And the Bears obviously have unified on a clear vision and become aggressive in that manner to go out and address needs. It's funny because as of, Tuesday morning, I had O-line as their top need going into free agency. My top 5 positions of need going into free agency were offensive line, defensive tackle, tight end, defensive end, and running back. And now I'm trying to figure out, like, with these two acquisitions, how far now does offensive line drop in the list of needs? Does it drop out of the top 5? Does it drop to 4 as you kind of look for a center and maybe some competition at left tackle? But have they sort of taken that off their needs list, or at least dropped it significantly?
Well, I mean, I love that idea. I love the idea that now we can be comfortable and take a deep breath about left tackle for those of us who are still not completely convinced about the left, Braxton Jones. So you do, right. You bring in the competition there. Darnell Wright stays at right tackle. The question that we have now, I guess, Dan, that just about does it for Tevin Jenkins, unfortunately, unless they're thinking about bringing him back for depth, unless there's something we don't know if maybe he and Jonah Jackson can duke it out still for right guard. But I think this says, even if Tevin Jenkins may be injury prone like Jonah Jackson, I think they just want new faces along that offensive line. As much as that pains me to say, because obviously I like Tevin Jenkins a lot, but it doesn't seem like he's going to fit here.
Right. Well, but now you bring up the question on what is the injury history of Jonah Jackson. Very strange 2024 in LA. He was a highly sought after guard on the free agent market a year ago at this time, and he gets a 3-year, $51 million deal in LA. He's recovering from offseason knee surgery. He misses a good chunk of the offseason, aggravates a shoulder issue in training camp. Then that shoulder issue eventually sends him to IR during the regular season, comes back from IR, makes one start, plays all 70 snaps in a game against the Dolphins, and then doesn't see the field again until the season finale when the Rams were resting their starters for the playoffs. And so that's a huge question for me. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of that just yet. It's on the list of what happened in LA for Jonah Jackson. Along with that, we do know that the first 4 years of his career came in Detroit with Ben Johnson on hand. So Ben Johnson obviously had some say in saying, look, like, I can look past 2024. I can believe in the player that I got to know in the Motor City and understand that Jonah Jackson was a guy that, listen, as a run blocker, he's got a great reputation, particularly when he's able to get out in space and use some of the athleticism to really make way for runners. you've got to figure out what that looks like now at this stage of his career and what last year was all about, because that is the mystery on the Jonah Jackson report card, is what the heck happened in LA that took a guy that was signed to a $51 million deal a year ago at this time and told the Rams, hey, we got to get rid of you before you come back for year 2.
Right. And it would be a mistake considering the Bears' history. And I am not saying that this is Nate Davis in any way, shape, or form.
No. Please don't ever say that.
No. As in, you just better have a backup plan. That's all.
No doubt. And I'll just tack onto that, because the folks that I talked to yesterday said that in terms of a locker room presence, and I use presence in a loose term here, that Jonah Jackson is one of those guys that is into football and going to give you everything he has every day. And he's going to be a really driven dude inside your building and the type of guy you want to build around. Nate Davis came to Haugh Hall with a completely different reputation than that. And so, like, your comparison is right to say, like, you better have a backup plan. You always better have a backup plan. But certainly you're not dealing with the same type of personality in any way, shape, or form than you were.
That's like I have to take it back now. That's like
no. I don't want you to take it back.
When we use the word Nate Davis, it's like using a really bad swear word. We have to really make sure it's an appropriate place to use it. But I meant it in the way of we have learned that you better have competent offensive linemen standing by to fill in if you think a guy is injury prone. That's what I said about Tevin Jenkins, even going into these last couple of years. Keep him. You want him because he's good, but you damn well better have somebody good backing these guys up. But that's what the Bears have lacked. They've lacked the starting depth as well. So all of that has existed, certainly. So it's something to keep in mind for the Bears, because you want them to be healthy and good.
I don't know off the top of my head what Joe Thuney is going to be like in terms of his ability to scare us. You and I both made requests that the Bears get an offensive lineman that can scare us, but I do know that he's spent his entire career in winning cultures, and that is a great addition to a locker room when you've got a guy who's come from New England and Kansas City and can tell you, hey, this is not how it's done. Like we've got to get our SH together, and we've got to make sure that we can operate at a high level if we have any dreams of competing for things, and so, like, I love that experience that comes along with the talent that he brings to the table and the proven credentials he has. The fact that he knows what it looks like and what it shouldn't look like should be an asset to that offensive line instantly.
Roy Robertson Harris was a guy that I was always a little hesitant to speak to. But we're always giving examples of guys that
we need to go like through the last 12 years of rosters and just like make an all angry team, and we can put it out there.
We said, I like to talk about guys. They need guys in the locker room that reporters are just a little bit hesitant to go up to, even though we will, because you never know what they're going to say. Like an Olin Kreutz type. I mean, that's the extreme example. I did not cover Olin Kreutz, but we've had plenty of guys who we've put mics up to in the past where you're like, I don't know what I'm going to get. So it'd be nice if the Bears had those guys.
On that topic, you always know what it feels like when you walk up with a little bit of trepidation, and then you have like a good 3.5 minute interview and you walk away and you're like, whew, like I dodged one there, right? Like, I feel like that happened with me a couple times with Lucas Patrick, where like he had an edge to him, right? And it didn't necessarily translate into his on-field play when he was in Chicago, but you're like, oh my God, like, what am I going to get from him today? Because he could be a little nasty at times.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, his own GM referred to him as a prick when he arrived. And so,
and he could be that way.
That was on the scouting report, but then you'd get like 3.5 good minutes. You're like, that was pretty insightful. I think I can be able to use that in my story for the weekend.
I had an interview with Lucas Patrick, the Bears' former center and guard from Green Bay, and he was just kind of being prickly with me. And I don't even remember the exact content, but it was like he wasn't answering my questions. My questions weren't that difficult. I wasn't trying to burn him on anything. And we go through this whole dance for about 5 minutes. I get nothing out of it. But then the next day I get a call from one of the PR people saying that Lucas Patrick left me this message. Tell Mark Grote I apologize for being prickly during our interview yesterday.
Wow.
So it was actually, that's why I could tell this story. It actually turned out to be a happy ending. I gave him a fist pump the next day. I'm like, okay, I appreciate you saying that, because you were kind of prickly yesterday.
I like that you brought that up. And I know you also had previously said on the podcast that Bobby Massey made you a little bit uneasy at times.
Yeah,
I got along with Bobby terrifically, and always found him very approachable. And I did always note him as a member of the first team all gratuitous swear word team, because he would drop MFers when MFers didn't need to be dropped within interviews. And you're like, yeah, it's a good thing I work for a newspaper, because I can put parentheses around that, block that out, and
that's hilarious.
Not have to waste the sound. Man, what do you think, Grote, in terms of this position need thing? Now that we see these additions here, and what this means for what they should go after when the free agent market opens on Monday.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the defensive side of the ball, obviously, where you could start to get some work done on that side. I don't know if they're staring down. I mean, this opens up a lot of things, not just free agency, but what they may or may not do in the draft at this point. So it's always good when you start to get some things done, so you can eliminate some things and go after other things that you need.
Remember when we talked a couple of weeks ago about the Reggie Ragland principle? It's now maybe the Tyler Booker principle, where you don't waste your time investing in deep, long stories about draft picks until free agency is over, because now they certainly don't need Tyler Booker anymore, right? Like you've gone out and gotten 2 veteran guards. I would be stunned if they used their premium asset in the draft, the top 10 pick, to take a guard. And so it changes everything. It changes every mock draft that's going to come from this point on, because that's not a position that needs to be filled urgently anymore. And you obviously have bigger needs elsewhere.
Teams can start to the legal negotiation, the legal tampering window opens on March 10th. Is that Monday? I don't know.
It is Monday.
That is Monday.
11 a.m. Chicago time.
Right. So the fun it'll be blitz next week. Free agency starts on March 12th. That's when you could actually start to sign guys. So
and finalize these trades.
And exactly when we will get. So we're not going to get official press or any kind of press releases yet from the Bears, but it's going to be interesting. One thing too that I noticed here, Dan, about Jonah Jackson, the Bears' new interior offensive lineman. Did you go as deep as I did, Dan, to realize that his NFL debut, September 13th, 2020, was against the Chicago Bears?
Well, you know what that game was? That was the first game of the COVID era. It was the only road game that I went to that season. Ford Field, weirdest environment I've ever been in my life. Parking that car outside that stadium and walking through streets that were completely empty to go watch an NFL football game. Bears won that one late, and I believe it was DeAndre Swift who dropped the pass in the end zone that allowed him to win that game.
Oh my goodness! And that was his rookie year. It might have been his first game too.
Yes,
that might have been DeAndre Swift's first ever game. You are right, Dan. September 30th, 2020, the Bears beat the Lions 27-23. Mitch Trubisky, he always played well against the Lions. Everybody always played well against the Lions. I remember.
I'm assuming there was. I was assuming there's a deep shot to Anthony Miller somewhere in that game too.
Yes, there was. If you can name the other 2 touchdown recipients, 2 receivers. Actually, I'll tell you, one was a tight end. And one was a receiver. Okay.
I want to guess this.
Tight end, receiver. Anthony Miller had one of them, and Trubisky threw all 3 of them.
Oh man, a tight end. I like my brain is showing me JP Holtz, but I know that's not it.
Let me know when you're ready for a clue.
Too early for Jesper Horsted to be in the mix there in that game.
Man, he was a preseason hero too, Jesper Horsted. That's where he
was Jimmy here for was that a Jimmy Graham touchdown?
That was a Jimmy Graham touchdown.
I'm like picturing it now. I feel like it was a really easy post up in the end zone, and it was like, oh man, this is gonna be easy when the Bears get inside the 5. They're just gonna post up Jimmy.
Right, and we were probably screaming, "Where's Cole Kmet? How come you're not playing Cole Kmet?
He's a rookie. You just drafted him.
Get him in there, man." Oh yeah, we got to get him in there. You're right. Next week, not in there again. There's always been a problem with Cole Kmet and coaches. What is it about Cole Kmet? There's one other guy that caught a pass, a receiver.
Javon Wims.
Yeah, baby.
Oh yeah. He had a catch in that game, a touchdown in that game.
He had a touchdown. Unless I read it wrong, I don't remember it either. I mean, I had to look. It's not like I just knew this off the top of my head. I mean, it's starting to come back to me. Like most of these pre-Detroit getting good, there was always good stuff for the Bears against the Lions, but all of that is ruined now. But yeah, good old Javon Wims.
You've been inside Ford Field as recently as this last Thanksgiving. You know how raucous that place can be when it is empty and a game comes down to the last play and the football team wins a game on the last play and there is zero reaction from the stands. It is one of the most surreal experiences in history. I will never forget that as long as I live, being like, whoa, that was being at a gym watching a pickup basketball game end. You know, like that's the eruption was all from the Bears bench, and that was it. That was the only sound you heard in the entire stadium, and it was really, really kind of weird in here.
Dan, I was on the sidelines for those. I was doing Bears sidelines then, and it was just the wildest thing in the world. From my perspective, it was good because the access was unbelievable down there, and I had 432 bathrooms to myself. Usually, I could use any bathroom at any time, man.
I was just gonna say this is a good postseason episode for us because I assume you traveled to every single road game that year, right? There was no benefit in it for me because all the post-game interviews were on Zoom, so we didn't really go anywhere. And so
I apologize. We did not go on the road.
That's right. Because Joniak was doing the broadcast from like a studio in the
performance studio. We have a performance studio in the Prudential Towers, actually, which it is still this big, beautiful kitchen stage. So they were Thayer and Joniak were doing the games
watching on like 5 monitors, right?
On a TV, and Marky Mark, that's me. Sometimes I like to call myself Marky Mark. I was at home watching the road games.
Were you on the air from home? Just like
not during the game, because what am I going to do? We're not small market. We're not going to try to fool the people. But since we couldn't travel, I would just do stuff for the pregame. I would do all my interviews during the week. I was done when the game started. I was useless to them, and then postgame I would help out as well. So it was a wild time, and just being it. The bad part from a sideline reporter's perspective then was you have no juice, to use one of your words, Dan, no juice from the crowd when they send it down to you. So you lose a lot of perspective. But yeah, you're right, Dan. It's something that we could, I'm sure there will be, 20 years down the road, there'll be some great documentaries on these seasons, but there are experiences that we could start to share and realize how weird they were back then.
I wish I had done a better job of like keeping journal entries about all those things that went on that year, because it was so strange. And again, like, the TVs, remember, they started to pump in artificial sound to make the experience more normal for the viewer, but you're at a game that it's completely silent, and then you come home and you throw it on the DVR and you're like, this is not how none of this is accurate. This is like a fake depiction of what happened here. It was wild times. Man, yeah, we've got some things to unpack as the offseason rolls along. I do want to bring this up because you mentioned it a bit ago. Our audience is always very concerned with our personal well-being.
Yeah.
You mentioned the draft wallet. They've got 4 picks inside the top 75 for next month. And then you mentioned 1 5 and 2 7s. If it stays like that, Saturday, a draft weekend's a breeze, man. Like, you don't have to start really checking in until about 3 o'clock. As the draft is wrapping up, and they're taking 2 guys you never heard of in round 7.
Yeah.
That's going to be an easy day.
No doubt.
Knock on wood, there's no chance it's going to be an easy day.
Oh, no, something will change. I mean, I'm laughing at you right now because it's going to change. Joe Thuney is here. Jonah Jackson is here. We shall see what the Chicago Bears do next. Dan, is there any parting words that you would like to share with our Take the North audience before we get out of here today?
No, I mean, I just like this is an unexpected week, I think, for the Bears, and you feel like they took some big steps forward here. Again, it's going to be great to hear the vision of the people that made these deals to figure out how it looks and how they are planning for this going forward. But man, now it's up to us to adjust and figure out what the draft board looks like from here and how the Bears kind of pivot in a new direction for free agency. I think I did mention it earlier that you're now down below 50 million in salary cap space, probably around 48 when everything's all said and done. And so now you've got to figure out what that looks like for your next set of investments.
We will adjust, and we'll do podcasts every single day if we have to. If the Bears give us the news that they have given us on this day, and they continue to build and do, I'll just part by saying this as the motto for the Bears this year, at least from my head: doing things differently, doing things better. And since the Ben Johnson hiring, that is the vantage point from which I am looking. They have started to do things differently, and they've started to do things better. Let's see if they continue to do that.
Part 2 of our Super Bowl preview next week.
Yeah, it's the march to the Super Bowl. Where is the Super Bowl next year? Do you know off the top of your head? It's probably in Miami. I'm just going to say Miami. It's the march to Miami.
Atlanta, question mark, but I don't think that's right.
It's one of those plays. Like, we could figure it out. March to wherever for the Chicago Bears as they head to the Super Bowl. You heard it right here on the Take the North podcast, where usually we're not prone to hyperbole, but it's a big day for the Bears. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune. Thank you to Adam Studzinski, the executive producer of the Take the North podcast. I am Mark Grote, thanking all of you for listening to and watching the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.